Hello, everyone. I am Ben Johnson, and this is the Perpetual Chess Podcast. Perpetual Chess is a weekly interview show where top chess players, authors, content creators, and accomplished amateurs discuss their careers and share stories and chess improvement tips. Perpetual Chess is a part of the Blue Wire Podcast Network, and we'd like to give a special thanks to our presenting chess education sponsor, Chessable.com. For more information about the show, you can go to perpetualchesspod.com. But without further ado, let's get to the show. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Perpetual Chess. We are joined this week by a world champion. He is the Correspondence Chess World Champion, a Correspondence Chess Grandmaster. In fact, he won the tournament that gained him this title. It was completed in October of 2022. Correspondence chess, of course, historically was played by mail without assistance, whether it be from computers or other humans, was the general guidelines over many decades ago. These days, it is played primarily by email with engine assistance allowed. So the game has changed a lot, but it's still a fascinating variant of chess. We've gotten many requests to discuss it over the years. In fact, I did discuss it once with Alex Dunne, who recently passed away. So rest in peace to Alex Dunne, longtime columnist for U.S. Chess. But bringing it back to our guest, he is a particular expert on chess engines and opening theory, as one must be to be a correspondence chess grandmaster. He's written books generally on chess, on the Greek gift sacrifice, and he's written books on how to use Chessbase. He is a chess book and stamp collector, a columnist for American Chess Magazine, and he is now joining us. He's also a friend of mine, by the way. Welcome to the show, Jon Edwards.
Oh, thank you for having me, Ben. It's a pleasure.
Yeah, it's long overdue. I know you've had a crazy few months. I wasn't shocked that you won the World Championship from my vantage point, but I have been a bit surprised at how intense you've said the reaction has been. So how has your life changed since you were crowned World Champion, Jon?
Well, in many regards, I'm both more and less busy. There's less chess to work on. And that was, those 14-hour days for more than a decade. But since I won the thing, I remember distinctly on October 8th, I was giving chess lessons at the time, and I couldn't enjoy the flood of the mail because I still had classes. By the time that ended, I had already received the first comment. I'm not sure exactly where it was. I don't remember, questioning the legitimacy of a world championship win that involved the machine. And in this age of neural nets, and I'm sure we'll get to all of that. The reality is that it's been an amazing few months. There have been more than 20 articles, a lot of requests for information. A professor from Princeton reached out with regard to the human-computer interface because he was really curious whether or not a human really brought anything to the party. It's been fun in that regard. I have to be honest, I'd rather be playing chess, and this sudden surge of fame is uncomfortable. My wife and I are very sort of non-social, and the last 3 years with the pandemic only sort of magnified all of that. It was fully fine to be home and just playing chess and not being bothered by the requirements of social engagement, and suddenly everybody wanted to be a part of this. So I think that's sort of an answer to your question. It's obviously much more complex. The funny part about it was that although the win came on the 8th, by the 10th, and it was just 2 days later, in a complete coincidence, the ICCF reached out and wanted to know if I wanted to play. I had just won the 32nd World Championship, but they wanted to know if I wanted to enter the 33rd. One look from my wife convinced me that probably wasn't a very good idea. So,
yeah, and the ICC being not the Internet Chess Club, but the International Correspondence
Chess Federation, ICCF.
Chess Federation. Okay, thank you. And to give listeners a bit more context, by the way, I mentioned that I'm friendly with Jon. We actually live less than 15 minutes apart, so I've seen his incredible book and stamp collection. But so, Jon, you're how old?
69.
69, and Jon is retired from working at Princeton University. So if you're wondering, how does he spend 12 to 14 hours a day playing correspondence chess? That is how you worked in the IT department, correct, Jon?
Worked in IT for 24 years. I was assistant VP for computing and information technology for more than half of that. And in the latter half, I was coordinator of institutional communication.
Okay. And what you said about a former colleague from Princeton wondering, what does a human bring to the party in terms of these engine games? What did you tell him?
I've told him a lot. He's really worked on this very intently. This is a fellow named Ed Tenner, who has worked extensively in this area and is somewhat skeptical of the whole AI revolution. I confess that I don't feel the same way that he does. I'm rambling a bit here, but there's this incredibly funny quote that was recorded in New in Chess magazine just in the last issue from me, talking about how the best correspondence chess players in the world can overcome the machine, which is related to your question. And I did give that quote in a moment of euphoria after I had won, but the reality is I'm starting to wonder if is it okay to wonder if something that I personally said is wrong. The AI really is having a tremendous effect, and not just in chess. It's having an effect everywhere. We're in the news right now. They're talking about these bots that are writing kids' papers and how education's going to have to change. The taxis are being driven by people, and we don't even need the people anymore. I can see that happening in just a few years. So is this just a canary in the coal mine? Is AI having a tremendous effect on chess to the point that humans do bring nothing to the party? I can safely say that I earned my way in. There was a semifinal round, about a decade ago. There was the candidates, and I certainly earned my way into the final. And there's an old saying that you can't win it if you're not in it, and I earned my way in. But I sure as heck got lucky. I'm sure you'll be asking about that in the final round itself. The chess itself, everybody has retooled their repertoires around the engines. These neural net engines are an utter beast. And it's now to the point that there are various openings that are just not going to be played because they take too much risk. I know we're going to continue to explore this, so I'm just giving you a kind of general overview of where I think this conversation is probably likely to go.
Well, let's zoom out a little more for listeners before we continue, because I do think they'll be interested to hear what opening battlegrounds remain in these high-level chess games held by computers. But one thing we should say is, so the tournament you're referring to is the World Championship, and as in classical chess, there's a candidates tournament preceding it. Then you get into the final, and you had shared first with the best tie breaks, I believe, correct?
Yes, I had finished with a +2 score.
Yeah, with a +2 score, and so out of the 136 games in the championship, 119 were draws. And as Jon said, sometimes when you do win a game, it's not because someone hung a mate and won. It can sometimes be some sort of lapse in keeping up with the move, like whose move it is in a game. If you time out, basically, that's a way that people often lose, or they may make a mistake, or there can be cheating. Now, before we go on, Jon, so in the 2 games that you won, what were the story of those games?
Again, I want to emphasize I should buy a lottery ticket as I tell you the story. One fellow dropped out, and I don't know why, and I don't think anybody does. I think he got sick. It was sort of in the age of COVID, so it's certainly possible that he came down with that. The tragedy, and permit me to go on for a second because this is just astounding. About a week before he dropped out and resigned his games to his remaining competitors, and I was fortunate to be one of those folks, he had accepted a draw from another player. So the other player who had offered the draw and had it accepted was very upset because his personal chances had been virtually eliminated by the fact that he got a draw but other people won. And he turned around right after that debacle and promptly resigned his game in an even position to his countrymen, so that his countrymen suddenly had some meaningful chances to compete with those of us who had been fortunate to get the point from the fellow who had gotten sick and dropped out. About a year later, and it was about a year later, one of my opponents, and this is the most astounding thing and why I should buy a lottery ticket, in a completely even position, hung a piece. It's just kind of unthinkable. I understand what happened. He was thinking well ahead. He knew what move he was going to play, but instead of analyzing the move he was going to play, because he already knew he was going to make it, he was analyzing the position one move hence. And that's the move that he played as opposed to the move that he should have. He hung a piece. He resigned instantly. And suddenly, how strange, I was put into a position where I was +2 and leading the field, and in a funny position that if all the other games were drawn, all the remaining games were drawn, I would become world champion. Having said that, I wanted the legitimacy of winning a real game. And I was involved in a fabulous match against a fellow named Sergei Osipov from Russia, and I had a small advantage. The game itself is well worth everybody's time. It went 119 moves, and certainly shows how much I wanted to win the game, and give myself the cushion that I think I deserved. And unfortunately, it ended in a draw. But that game was astounding. There was one point, which is worth just mentioning, where the only idea left in the position, and it's well beyond the ability of the machine to see or forecast or plan. I had to get him to move his b-pawn forward so that it'd become weak. The problem was, could I get him to move his b-pawn forward? There weren't going to be any pawn moves or captures, so I had to do this within a 50-move limit. I literally had a whiteboard up on above my desk with the counting down or counting up to the 50-move rule. And I did get him to move his b-pawn forward. The next step was to get him to move it one more time. I got him to move it the first time in 38 moves. If I could get him to move it one more square, I knew exactly where my pieces had to be. The rooks would transfer over to the g file, and the king would head over to b1, and everything had a place. But I had to get him to move the pawn forward first, and I couldn't quite do it. It was close. He defended really well.
Yeah, and in a game like that, there's been a lot of talk about sort of the change in how endgame engines evaluate things. Of course, when I got to interview Matthew Sadler, we discussed it, and friend of the pod, Nate Solon, has written about how Stockfish in particular, the what used to be a smaller advantage now is a bigger advantage, probably because Stockfish is even better at winning one positions. But when you're trying to eke out something that's kind of on the border between a draw and a win, Jon, like what was the engine evaluation for the game that you describe from the championship?
Stockfish had it at about roughly between 0.28 and 0.32 for that 38 move period.
Okay.
The challenge for a human is that these runs were extensive. They took long periods of time, involved obviously some very impressive hardware that I have running here. But when you're running it, you can have 16, 17, 20 lines, and they all say it's 0.28. So the common way of thinking about that is, well, if all the lines are 0.28, then very clearly there's a structural aspect to this that's drawish. I didn't believe that because I had a plan, and I knew where my pieces needed to be, and I knew what I wanted to happen to the pawn structure. But I simply needed to make sure that I found a way through the morass of all these equivalent lines to pursue the plan that I wanted, which was, in fact, to force him to get his pawn up there. In order to get, for example, to get him to move the pawn, I had to get a bishop on c2, a queen on d1, the knight on c3, the king had to be on a certain square. All of this was rigorously worked out, and I spent just as much time working with the machine. If I can get the pawn there, where do my pieces need to be? If I can get the pawn there, where do my pieces need to be? Is it always going to be possible to move the pieces and reconfigure them from where they are to where they're going without him getting any counterplay? Those are the kinds of considerations that are going on. People want to know, what are you're spending 12 hours a day, 14 hours a day for 12 years. What the heck are you doing? That's what I was doing.
And I'm guessing, you do it because you love it, right? You find it fascinating just trying to eke home this tiny advantage.
Yeah, it's sort of an ultimate challenge. I'm left firmly believing that there is still some hope for humans with the machines. But not in tactical positions, and certainly not meaningfully out of the opening. The key, I believe, is finding opening variations that lead to fixed pawn structures, and within those structures allowing very long-term maneuvering along the lines of what I've just described.
And sorry, Jon, I had a follow-up about hardware. We're going to be talking about software, and you may or may not be dodging my questions about software later. But what can you say in terms of, I know you have a dedicated machine that you basically have running 24 hours a day on a game when you have it going on. What sort of hardware, and I'm not a huge computer person, so be gentle in describing it, but what sort of hardware do you use?
Actually, I have two. So I have one that I dedicated to the Osipov game. It was always running Osipov at one position or another around the clock for an entire year. And the other machine, which is essentially a mirror of the first one, it is outfitted in precisely the same way, has the same data, was working on everything else and helping with just problems of life and communicating with email and all the rest. The machines themselves are solid. They have a very, very, very good processor, you don't care about the numbers, but I mean, it's something that in terms of cost is very expensive. Both machines have enormously powerful processors, which I add the real key these days of the supply chain difficulties is simply getting hold of them. Because in these cases, it's not buying a machine from IBM or Dell. You have to build your own in order to make this work.
You have the capability.
Yes, we build our own machines here.
Wow.
The machines also have an enormous amount of memory. And the memory is there to store table bases in the memory so that they're not being called up off the disk. Both machines are outfitted that way. So the table bases themselves, in this case, six-piece table bases, because I don't believe any home computer can have enough memory right now to run a 7. That has to be accessed from the outside. So the 6-piece is loaded into memory with Chessbase, then running.
Okay, and for listeners not familiar, a table base is basically every position with 6 pieces or fewer on the board. There's an answer, whether it's winning or losing. In fact, every 7 piece as well, as Jon alludes to, but obviously the more pieces, the more computational power required. And they're working on 8-piece table bases, right, Jon?
Well, I didn't believe that 7-piece table bases would be done in my lifetime. And I don't believe that 8-piece, therefore, will be done in my lifetime, or frankly, my children's lifetime. But there are a number of different implementations here that suggest that perhaps it's possible.
Okay.
The one
and another follow-up.
Go ahead.
Sorry. Another follow-up. You did allude to these machines being expensive. I'm sure listeners would love to know how much, just to give them context. Are you willing to share that info, Jon?
Yeah, these are $6,000 and $7,000 machines.
Okay. Honestly, even a bigger number wouldn't have shocked me. And Jon, I know since we're friends, I know you made some good investments in your younger years. I know you're in reasonably good financial shape. But between the time you spend on this and the expense, is your wife fully supportive of this hobby?
She's been amazing. I could probably talk about her for the rest of the time, and maybe I even should. But yes, completely supportive in terms of everything. We've not been able to travel meaningfully for 10 years. We haven't gone out to dinner with friends for 10 years. We haven't done an awful lot of the things that most married couples would do. And I've got to tell you, she's just utterly thrilled about what's happened here. She now just sort of delights in calling herself Mrs. Dr. Grandmaster, World Champion Edwards.
I forgot the doctor in the intro. Yeah,
sorry.
PhD in history. I forgot to mention. Yeah. Well, that's great to hear. And do you think, the computers are so strong. If you went out to dinner, would your results? I'm sure you've gotten questions like this before. Like, the game's going to be a draw either way, right?
This was complete dedication. It's complete lunacy, I suppose. I'm certifiable. But no, this was an all-out effort to try to do this. I even retired early because I could. I was fortunate in that regard. Let's give a shout out here, please, to Apple Computer.
Yeah, you might. I wasn't going to bring it up, but I'm sure listeners would love to hear that story. So you bought Apple stock in what year?
I bought Apple in 84, 85. I bought 100 shares at 40. And when it went down to 20, I bought another 100.
Unbelievable.
Those 200 shares turned into 9,600 shares, I think.
From splits.
Yeah, of course. And that meant that my kids went to good schools and their educations got paid for from that original $6,000 investment. And so I'm very lucky. And that also allowed me to retire early.
And did you ever sell the shares?
Along the way, to pay for things, sure. But there's that old story about the guy who says he's rich, but he's living in a hovel because he doesn't sell his shares.
Right.
We weren't quite like that.
And what was your mindset? And I mean, not to derail this too much, but it's fascinating to me to have it's a different kind of mental fortitude, but maybe not totally different from the sort of resilience required for correspondence chess. Did you have moments where you just wanted to take your chips off the table? And if so, how did you talk yourself out of it? Okay,
so now you all understand just how certifiable I am. I never had that moment, not even for a second. It was get up in the morning, do the stuff, and my sleep patterns got interrupted too. I was getting up at 3 a.m. to work on this stuff, and staying up till 6. And sleep didn't matter when I slept, so I took naps when the machines were at stages where what they were doing weren't terribly important. And so all of life just got redefined by this endeavor.
Okay, and sorry, listeners, I got to derail this for like 2 more minutes about the Apple stock history. You can fast forward if you need to. But so first of all, Jon, what was the original thesis when you bought the stock in 1984?
Well,
Your
actually,
thesis.
I had bought an Atari, which is not Apple. I bought an Atari to work on my dissertation. And along the way, one of my friends bought an Apple, and I actually was spending more time working with his Apple than I was with my Atari. I thought the thing was just astounding. I bought 100 shares. I had some cash. I decided, what the heck? This seemed like the right thing to do.
Okay.
And then somewhere along the line, somebody had explained that if you're happy with your thesis of why you bought it is correct, and the thing goes down, buy some more. And so I did, and I'm glad I did.
And was this like it was a significant percentage of your net worth at the time, or?
We were not rich.
Right. Okay.
I was a graduate student in history at Michigan State University, for heaven's sakes. We didn't have an awful lot. And then it's a long story, which your listeners probably don't want to hear about, but I somehow found my way from history into computing. So after I finished my dissertation, I went to work not in history. I went to work at Byte magazine in the computing and the review department. I was the head of reviews for Byte magazine from 86 to 88 before I went to Princeton. And so I was suddenly on the inside of everything that was happening at an extraordinary time in microcomputing. And so it was just an obvious thing to do in terms of
okay. And last Apple question, somewhat famously, the company had a down period after Steve Jobs left, before he returned, before the invention of the iPhone. I'm sure you were still way up in the stock, but at a period like that, you weren't tempted to sell either?
I was tempted to sell all the way along the way, but I figured that's just going to ride this through.
Wow.
By the way, Apple wasn't the only. There were some miserable failures along the way.
Other stocks.
It's a chess podcast. I bought a little solar outfit called LDK, which I was convinced was backed by the good faith and credit of the Chinese government. It went under.
Okay.
But I also bought NVIDIA at 13, and stock adjusted, I really bought it at 3, and you can see the price this morning. It's just through the roof. So
wow.
I've had some fun.
Amazing.
I know the technology, and I've if I buy something, it's just good advice for everybody. If you're a user and you think something is astounding, buy some shares.
Sorry, I can't resist. And what about the valuation? Is it just sort of, if it's a growing company, that's not like, are you concerned with the valuation at the time if you see a powerhouse product, or not especially?
Not especially. I mean, NVIDIA, I assumed, was going to be at the forefront of the AI revolution. And I saw that pretty early on.
Great. Okay.
Originally, the thesis had to do with Bitcoin and the rest. But right now,
okay.
if everybody's hypothesis is that AI is taking over chess, and frankly, everything else for that matter, then put your money to work in the one company that's going to be responsible for providing the cycles for AI.
Fascinating stuff. Maybe we'll save a bit more stock advice for the very end, but we got to bring it back to chess, Jon. But first so next up, listeners, I'm going to be asking Jon about the opening battlegrounds amongst the top engines. But first, we're going to take a break and hear from our sponsors. Perpetual Chess is brought to you in part by Aimchess.com. Aimchess has an algorithm that gathers your games from the major sites like Chess.com and Lichess and gives you actionable intel based on the patterns it detects. It can be how you do with certain openings, what aspects of the game you excel at versus need work at. And guess what? Aimchess has a new feature that you should check out right now, just in time for the new year. You can check out your year in review for 2022. You just enter your username and it gives you how many hours you spent chess, how many games you played, how you did with various openings. Lots of fun facts that the algorithm is able to gather. So be sure to check out aimchess.com. If you decide to try out subscribing, use the code Perpetual30 to save 30%. You can also use the link in the show description to try out aimchess.com. You should know what that sound means. That's the sound of another sale on Shopify and the moment another business dream becomes a reality. Shopify is the commerce platform revolutionizing millions of businesses worldwide. So whether you're selling chess courses, chess boards, or something totally unrelated to chess, Shopify simplifies selling online and in person so you can focus on successfully growing your business. It covers every sales channel, whether it's in-person point of sale system or an all-in-one e-commerce platform. It even lets you sell across social media like TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, packed with industry-leading tools ready to ignite your growth. It gives you complete control over your business. And thanks to 24/7 help and an extensive course library, Shopify is there to help you every step of the way. What's incredible to me about Shopify is how no matter how big you want to grow, Shopify is there to empower you with the confidence and control to revolutionize your business and take it to the next level. So now it's your turn to get serious about selling to Shopify. So sign up for a $1 a month trial period, shopify.com/chess by using the code chess. You know that they came from Perpetual Chess. So that's shopify.com/chess to take your business to the next level today. And we are back. So as Jon alluded to, the openings, of course, as they have in elite over-the-board chess, have taken a turn where someone like Magnus at times might look for something less theoretical in order to gain an edge. And as he alluded to, that can often be the case in engines as well. But why don't we start big picture, Jon? I'll name a few openings and you tell me if engines can play them. If you're likely to see it in an ICCF World Championship these days. I'm a Sicilian player. It's close to my heart. Let's start with the Najdorf. How's the Najdorf holding up?
Holding up fine.
Oh, good. I actually didn't think it was.
Holding up fine. There's the one variation that is just about really tough to beat. Anybody who beats it's going to become famous. Is in the bishop e3 line of the Najdorf with an early h5 by black. And busting that down will make if someone busts that down, they're going to become famous. I keep getting it. I'm still convinced that there's a way to beat the thing, and I have failed.
Interesting. Okay. Because you don't see it. I feel like it's lost a little bit of its luster in OTB elite chess, but it's still on firm ground,
I think
theoretically.
Over the board, that would be pretty hard to defend. So
okay. That's probably.
And there are easier places to defend. Now, you keep in mind, of course, I grew up and played the hedgehog early on, but I don't any longer because I don't think that holds up at this level of play. And so I switched over to the Sveshnikov.
And it's still okay.
It's still pretty much okay, but I find now, as I'm getting older, that the easier way to achieve a draw, and after all, on the black side, that's all I care about. I just want to draw. I'm not going to win a game with black anymore. I used to win all the time, can't anymore. So now I've begun answering e4 with e5.
Okay. Yeah,
and taking a quick draw.
and what's the most testing line against the Sveshnikov?
Well, the open lines with d4 are drawn.
Oh, interesting.
Isn't that just an
so
extraordinary statement to be able to make?
Wow.
And so the key, of course, are the Rossolimo lines with bishop b5, and there are a couple in there that are actually interesting.
Huh. I'll quiz you further as a Sicilian player off the record. And against d4, what are the most commonly seen replies?
Semi-slav is dominating, but not what I played. Nobody allows the Nimzo Indian, which gives black decent play, actually. And so almost all the games head over to knight f3 as opposed to knight c3 on move 3. And I've been playing Queen's Indians, which is just a very solid way of, again, getting a draw with a little bit of dynamic play in some of the lines. Not that I can ever imagine winning, but I'm very comfortable in every single one of those. And they all lead to evaluations from the machines that are flat.
Okay. And in terms of like 1e4 versus as white, 1e4 versus 1d4 versus 1 knight f3, are things trending in any particular direction?
They're all trending toward draws, which is why the best players are so frustrated that everybody's looking for an advantage someplace, and why the most dominant response to e4 again is e5, and I knew that I couldn't play knight f3 because the Petrov is drawn, the Roy Lopez is drawn, either the Berlin or the Marshall. There's nothing there, folks. sorry. Over the board, there's still a lot of play and a lot of hope, and you can go in there and be booked up and do reasonably well. But correspondence has changed. So I wound up playing the Vienna, which obviously has more of a drawish reputation. But I settled on the Gleck variation of the Vienna, which is e4, e5, knight c3, knight f6, g3. First of all, if they don't play knight f6 on move 2, I'm going to get an advantage because the King's Gambit decline lines and that whole ilk, those are slightly in white's favor, and I'd be thrilled to be able to go there. But against knight c3, knight f6, g3, the point of that is, of course, as I indicated before, I want to keep as many pieces on the board as possible. And in that line, the bishop on g2 winds up being a bit of a monster later on, especially if I can find a way to get his black's light squared bishop. But the pieces remain on the board, and I get to maneuver within a fixed structure for a very long time, as suggested by the game I had against Osipov, which again went more than 100 moves.
And I don't know much about the Vienna, John. I don't even, what's the main reply after? So e4, e5, knight c3, knight f6, g3. Is d5 the main reply? What does black play?
Yeah, d5 is one of the main replies. That leads to, gives the game a completely different character. It gets taken, knight takes, knight c3, knight takes, b takes. The b file opens up for rook b1 with an active rook. And there's some interesting timing issues that I've been exploring there. So I'm completely okay with the idea of going there. And again, I've given up the one exchange. But there's still enough play left, in fact, to justify it. And the evaluations in the engines that I care about are not 0.00, which is thrilling. If they don't go for that, if they go for the bishop c5 lines, then white has just a very, very, very patient and slow build-up with moves like, I'm castling king's side, and I'm playing h3, king h2. I'm going to break with d3 and f4. And the whole idea is that if black's king's on the king side, it's going to be f4, f5, and there's just a pawn rush. Spassky blew somebody out in that line. So one of the beauties of this line, I should add, is that a lot of the games and a lot of the analysis is old. And I have a large library. Mm-hmm. So what I did with some of the key games was literally to go back to the original sources and see what the individual players had to say about some of those early games. That was exciting. It's slow, but it's fun.
And any other opening battlegrounds? Do you see the English much? 1c4?
Yeah, absolutely. c4, e5 is drawn.
I'm noticing a pattern here.
Yeah. It's scary to be able to just sit here and you're a friend and just to say, this line is a draw. We're move 1, move 2, and there's nothing there. So one of the interesting things worth mentioning here is that there's a new Chinese database. And it's assembled by all the neural net technology. And what they've done is it's about 1 billion game fragments. And they have literally assembled evaluations of everything. And you can go in there and instantly compare your personal opening repertoire to what it is that they recommend and make sure that what you're playing is not suboptimal. And that really leads to a whole body of discussion. So what, in fact, is a suboptimal opening and why should I avoid it? In the old days, going back 20, 30, 40 years, people simply, in correspondence, they simply played the openings that they loved, or were taught, or that they played over the board. And if there were openings that had some slight inaccuracies or was what I call suboptimal play, they'd still play it because it was fun. It was who they are. It's an indication of their character. That's been drummed out of every correspondence player at this point. People who played, there was one game, simply one, that involved one game that involved a suboptimal opening in the entire world final. Somebody played the Benoni with black. And they got
Shout out to the Benoni, all right.
And they got destroyed. And that was literally the only single game in the entire event in which somebody actually beat somebody with real moves, and but they still made this horrible mistake. And I was left saying to myself, why didn't they play the Benoni against me?
Right.
I would have destroyed it too.
What line was what? I mean, I know there's plenty of ways for white to get an appreciable edge, but what line was played against it?
I don't recall off the top of my head.
Okay, I'll have to look that up. That's
awesome.
Hilarious. As a former Benoni player, I can relate to that. And John, I gather that you prefer correspondence chess to both online blitz and OTB chess. Is it safe to infer that?
Yes, of course.
And why? What do you prefer about it?
This is easy. So, my heaven. Over the board, there's a kid who shows up and he's picking his nose, or he's and wiping against his jacket, or he's coughing right now, which would drive me crazy, or he's just carrying on at the board and jumping up and down and swiveling in his chair. And I hate all of that. I just hate all of that. There's an aspect to this. And there is so much stress associated with playing a game in 5 hours that my temples start to pound, and I'm uncomfortable. I haven't gotten enough sleep, and so I'm tired. In correspondence, if I'm tired, I'll take a nap.
Right. Although it sounds like you don't take a lot of naps. I don't know.
I take them at odd hours, but the fact is that I can, and that changes everything. So the stress component that you'd imagine that was there is just not there. There's just no stress. With the result that in 12 years, I think I like to tell people I didn't make any mistakes. That's just not true, but I made only a small handful. Most of the moves were fully accurate.
And if you do make a mistake, you mentioned the person hanging a piece earlier by sending the move they were planning on playing in the second move. I mean, that's something plenty of us, including me, have done over the board. But what would be the nature of a mistake that you might make, Jon?
If I try to learn from them, I've made plenty in my lifetime, some doozies. So I wind up having a very mundane 25-step procedure before I make a move that actually makes sure that all the moves are made through a server, so you can bring the position up on the screen. I also bring it up separately on Chessbase, and I compare, like, where's Waldo? Are these positions? They should be identical before I make the move, and you can instantly see that they are. I'm just not prepared to make those kinds of mistakes, notational errors, or some administrative snafu. There's a time element to all of this, which you wouldn't imagine is there, but it is. Just not prepared to make those kinds of mistakes. And it's really hard for me, almost impossible for me to understand how anybody at this level could have made one. So there was one in the whole tournament, and amazing to say, I was the beneficiary. Mm-hmm. But no, I don't allow myself to do that. So as part of the actual decision-making process, I know exactly, in almost every position, I know what move I'm going to play, but I still run it in a variety of engines. I check databases. And the key step in all of this, which I don't mind talking about, because it's a Chessbase, it's really more of a Chessbase question. But in any structure, I'm fully aware of every game that's been played that reached that structure or a similar structure. And I know the games intimately. I know what plans were used. I know what worked. I know what failed.
So, but when you do make a mistake, is it related to the horizon effect, or what's the issue?
The last mistake I made was 11 years ago. Mm-hmm. So I don't remember.
This is correspondence chess only. I assume you've picked the wrong thing for dinner at some point or something like that.
Yeah, of course. And actually, I tell my friends, in life, you make mistakes all the time, and I cut myself some slack.
Right.
I don't get upset with myself until I make the 6th mistake in a day. But that's not true for correspondence chess. The quotient there is much smaller.
Okay. All right. Well, Jon, we've got some great questions from Patreon supporters of the podcast. Those who support the pod via Patreon can submit questions for the guests. So let's start with this one by Wayne Inkpen, who writes, he says, "Thanks so much for the 2 books you wrote on the use of Chessbase. A few weeks ago, I prepaid for a Chessable lecture that GM Sadler will be delivering this month on the use of chess engines. And he says he'd be happy to part with his hard-earned dollars to see you explain the advanced uses of Chessbase. And he's wondering if you would ever do something like that."
I would love to do that. I think that would be awesome. Especially since I've started using version 17, and the books themselves don't cover some of those uses.
Right.
And it is a real step forward for Chessbase. And they deserve a significant pat on the back for what they've done. They've really made meaningful analysis so easy. And I think that even a casual glance at the main analysis screen that Chessbase now uses would convince everybody to go out and get it. I don't work for them, so sounds like a commercial. I worked for them when Chessbase was on version 4. That was a very long time ago, more than 20 years. This is an astounding product. And
Okay. Now we should say for casual listeners, because Chessbase is not inexpensive, so I don't want someone rated 900 to run out and buy it necessarily. It's best for advanced uses. To me, it's like around 1800 is when its efficacy really starts to increase, and then it continues to increase the higher level stuff that you're doing. But in as simple as terms as possible, Jon, like what has improved? Because I'm a longtime Chessbase customer, but I haven't, for example, upgraded to the new version.
So you put an engine on in the current program in version 17, and I have 3 lines, and you're accustomed to what that looks like. So it's analyzing away. It tells you that Stockfish 15.1 is working away at this. Here are the 3 lines, and it tells you certain depth and there's certain evaluation. But far more than that, it will tell you if you're white what black's threat is in English. Wow.
Like in a sentence?
In a sentence. It will tell you what it is that white's plans are in the main lines in a sentence or 2 or 3. It literally spells this out. Suddenly, and you might say, well, gosh, it's going to be inaccurate. It's going to be, it's just a gimmick. It's not a gimmick. In fact, it really replicates the kind of thought pattern that any master is going to have. That is exactly what the masters are thinking while this thing is going on, and it just does the work for you.
Wow.
That's both good and bad, of course, but if your opponents have this, you need to have it too.
Wow, that's impressive, because I know there's been different companies working on that sort of technology. But that to me makes it sound like maybe it does have broader use for even lower rated players.
Well, where this was really fun is that they have this is more eye candy, and it's not a reason to go out and shell out $180 on a product, but they have a new function called Beauty. And beauty, of course, is in the eye of the beholder, but you can literally, if you have a database of your own games or Petrosian's games or somebody's games, you can click one button and it will go out and find Petrosian's beautiful games. Well, what exactly does that mean? So I decided to run this against my games, because I know my games and I know which ones I think are really kind of fun. And it agreed with me. It thought that the games that I thought were fun really were fun, but there were still surprises. It thought that every game that I'd lost was beautiful. I didn't like that especially, but it was sort of interesting to think about. But it also identified a handful, 5 or 6 of my games that said they were beautiful, and I'd forgotten about them. And it was really fun to go back and see what is it that about these obscure games that the machine likes. And I said, wow, this is sort of neat. So I integrated some of those games, frankly, into my teaching, because it was sort of new to me and fun for the kids.
That sounds pretty cool. All right, I know you're not a Chessbase employee, but you might have encouraged me to upgrade. Although I have to say, Jon, and I've said this before on the podcast, I mean, one reason that I appreciate your book, although as you say, it's it doesn't update with every Chessbase cycle, is I generally have found Chessbase not to be as user-friendly as I might wish, and that's part of the reason I'm always a little, despite its immense power and despite its like many cool features, I'm always a bit circumspect in recommending it, especially for newer players. But
I understand. That's actually why I wrote the book.
Yeah,
because
exactly.
The user manual I didn't think it was very good.
Yeah,
and I wanted to see if I could make the power of this product more accessible to people who would really benefit from it. But you're right, it's not at all a reasonable approach for people rated under 1500, I don't think. I do ask my students to buy it just because I'm sending all the homework home in Chessbase format, so they need to have something, either a reader or Chessbase or something. The unfairness of this is obvious, and that is it's hard enough to become a good chess player, but now I also need to have a computing environment and I have to be able to run this thing.
Right.
That's tough. Now 2 skills are required, and that cuts into the population of people who are going to be able to love and improve this game.
Yeah, fair point. All right, well, Jon, we got some engine-related questions coming next, but we do need to take one more break to hear from our sponsors. We'll be right back, and then Jon's going to reveal all the engines that he uses.
I don't think so.
Perpetual Chess is proud, as always, to be brought to you in part by Chessable.com. Chessable, of course, is known for their Move Trainer technology, which utilizes spaced repetition to help you remember tactical patterns and opening sequences. They have a huge library of courses for whatever aspect of your game you want to work on. Some of their new courses include a course on the Tarrasch defense to d4, which is a good choice if you're looking for a dynamic opening against 1d4. It's by Super Grandmaster Jordan von Forest. Speaking of Super Grandmasters, former world champion and legendary trainer Rustam Kazimjanov has a course out on the C3 Sicilian. If you're newer to chess, be sure to check out friend of the pod, I am Andras Toth's 1D4 for beginners. And of course, they've got tactics courses too. They have stuff you can check out for free. So if you have not already, make sure you go to chessable.com and keep an eye on their ever-growing supply of quality chess courses. And we are back, and friend of the podcast, Han Schutt, has, as is common for Han, written in with some very thoughtful questions. So we'll begin with the one that John has told me he will probably dodge, which is John willing to share whether you use Stockfish for correspondence chess or if you use a specific Stockfish clone like Core Chess?
Yeah, what I told Ben before the interview, this is a bit like asking McDonald's to share the recipe for the secret sauce. And mind you, that's actually a good analogy because there are people who've reverse engineered the secret sauce. And it wouldn't be hard to reverse engineer what I'm doing. I think it's safe to say that Stockfish 15.1, let me put it this way, is a monster. And you can go to some extremes to try to improve upon its output, as I try to do, and I don't want to go into the things that I've done to sort of even improve it further. But the reality is 15.1 is a significant step forward over even version 15. It's free to download, so there's that. And the reason that it's better is that you can now begin to think about running it on a laptop without overheating the equipment.
Wow.
15 was running hot on even my servers, let alone a laptop. I think it could have brought a laptop down without that much effort. 15.1 is a very significant step forward. So if you were reluctant to use it because you didn't want to hurt your hardware, you can consider. I don't want to be responsible if anybody runs 15.1 and their laptops overheat. But the key here, of course, is that when you're running 15.1 and you have a very powerful machine, don't run it at the full core limit. So I could run my engines at 32 core, but I don't. I crank it way down to 24 so that I'm leaving room for other things that might be operating in the background, the operating system, other applications that may pop up from time to time. It's really important to crank it down. And also, frankly, given the nature of this, especially if you're running, some of these runs go overnight, some of these runs go 4 or 5 days, and it's really important to monitor the temperature of your system and to know what the limits of your system are, so that if the system's going to shut off at 90 degrees centigrade, you should know that. And if this thing's running at 84, 85, 86, 87, it's running too hot, and you should crank down the demands upon it by limiting the number of cores. I'm sorry if that sounds technical, but I don't want anybody to run into hardware issues.
Okay, and you generally run your system overnight, John?
I usually, if there are key runs, I've been known to run things for 2, 3, 4 weeks.
And does that impact your electric bill?
I think we have the highest electric bill in Mercer County.
Has anyone come looking for like marijuana plants on your roof? Or I guess now that's legal, so maybe you don't have to worry about it anymore, but I'm just curious.
No, we haven't had police come by.
That's good.
They will be now.
Right. And they're not going to believe this chess engine story for a second. All right. Well, it's
but a cool way to hide what's really going on here.
Right. Exactly. And is Stockfish 15.1, is it incorporating neural nets as well as sort of the more brute force calculation?
Yes, it is a neural net engine. And as such is an utter monster. Neural nets are clearly the way this is going. The old brute force engines had a horizon effect that is well discussed and well understood. That no matter how much processing power you were going to throw at a brute force engine, there was always a point where it just simply wasn't going to see stuff. you came over to the house actually on last week, and I showed you a game where and it was extraordinary that the engine just simply didn't find the right move, because there was a nested combination 4, 5, or 6 moves later that the engine just discounted. It just didn't want to look at it. When you force the engine to actually look at the combination, it says, "Oh, this is really good," but it wasn't going to look at it by itself.
And this is even on Stockfish 15.1.
This is true on all of them. Mm-hmm. Stockfish gets there more quickly than those old brute force engines, but it still takes a while. And I think that the neatest advertisement for humanity here is that a human sees this combination. If a human thinks about it and takes it seriously, the human's going to see the combination way before the computer does. And that flies in the face of what we've come to believe about these engines, that they think that they see these combinations and all tactics far faster than we do, which is not always true, which is useful to know. Again, if you throw the engine into a position where it has to consider this combination, it sees it instantly. But there's something about the coding, and I don't know what that is. It's just useful to mention it because it just discounts it. I think somewhere in there's coding that says if something looks like it's -3, I'm not going to spend a lot of time and resources looking at something that's -3 because I'm wasting electricity here. I'm wasting the time of the engine. I'm just going to look at plausible lines. And that approach, while appreciated 98% of the time, tends to miss the really cool stuff.
Yeah, and for listeners, it was what Jon alluded to. The line he showed me was pretty cool. So maybe at some point, Jon and I will make some bonus content on YouTube, since this is audio only, showing the idea he refers to. But certainly, if you read, if you're familiar with the work of Matthew Sadler, you do see the occasional example of stuff that the engine misses, but it is fascinating. So Han has a couple other questions. Let's get to the next one, which is, given the high draw rate of correspondence chess, it's been suggested to prescribe the opening like they do in the Top Chess Engine Championship. These positions can be quite unbalanced, like plus 0.8 for white. And the question is, who scores best over a pair of games? So you would play it from both sides. He's wondering what you think of that as a potential way to combat the Correspondence Championship.
Sounds awesome.
You do it,
like
okay.
A really, really good idea. There are other ideas that are emerging, and not Fisher random, but the idea that the end of the game is not going to be evaluated as a draw if one side's up a pawn, or somebody delivers a perpetual check, or that kind of thing, that different kinds of endings are not going to be evaluated as 0.5. But if you're down 2 pawns and you deliver a perpetual, maybe you get 0.4. That kind of thing. And that change by itself would also have a monstrous and potentially interesting effect on the opening repertoires that are being used by folks. The Marshall, for example. Do I go into our Marshall gambit? I have a draw, but I'm down a pawn. How annoying. I'm going to win this game. I'm up a pawn, but there's no way to win. But knowing that if I'm up a pawn at the end, I'm going to get 0.55. as opposed to 0.5. That would eliminate the Marshall. Hell, my goodness.
I don't know. I prefer Han's idea. I mean, it's not really his idea, but I prefer the TKEC format.
Sure. No, the real point of all that requires a lot more time, of course. But the real point of his question is that something has to happen.
Okay.
Because the status quo is not tenable. The status quo is we're going to have we're now in the middle of the world final, the 33rd, and it's entirely plausible that every game will be drawn.
Yeah. And are there discussions about changing things?
Yeah.
Okay, that's good. Okay, next question from Han. Last question from Han is, with every chess player having access to the strongest engine, top chess players have changed their strategy for opening preparation. This we discussed a bit earlier. They take calculated risk looking for lines that might not be the first choice of the engine, but lead to unbalanced positions where a human might err, where superior knowledge is important, and where the risk of losing is still low. Han cites the game Dubov-Karyak in the Russian Championship 2020. So I'll link to that for listeners who want to check it out. And you might have already answered this actually, but Han asks, what is the equivalent strategy in correspondence chess? Is it what you were referring to earlier in locked pawn structures?
Yeah, I mean, the key for me was always Petrosian and some of his wins. And if you're looking for a game that had a tremendous influence on me, it was Jopen, Joppen, against Petrosian from sometime in the 50s. And the last 20 moves of this game had an astounding impact on my thinking, partly because Petrosian saw the whole thing in milliseconds. It's complex. There's a rook trade. There's an improvement of the bishop. There's a reposting of the knight. There's a reposting of the king at the end. He just saw the whole thing. This method of, I liken it, frankly, to a Chinese puzzle box. I don't know if you've seen these things. There are these rectangular boxes, and if you shake them, there's something rattling on the inside. It's a coin. It's actually a worthless coin. But the point is, how do I get to it? And if I've never done this before, it takes forever. I'm going to slide this, but it has to be done in a certain order. I have to slide this first, then I have to slide this, then I have to move this up, and all the rest. After you've had a lot of experience with Chinese puzzle boxes, you can go zoom, 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 and get to the coin. But if you have no experience, it becomes a monstrous thing. Petrosian used to see this method in a certain order. He would see it instantly. And to bring it back to your question, I think that what's happening with some of the best players on the planet, and certainly at the correspondence level, is that they have combed the entire opening book. That's not immodest. It's just true. They're combing the entire opening book looking for opportunities to pursue this method. There is a really cool example. Two more thoughts. One with regard to Carlsen himself, that you can reverse engineer any of these players. He certainly can be. You take all of his games and you take a look at where he's going consistently and then pose the simple question, why did he want to come to this position? It doesn't look very good for him. And then the more he played it 6 times, he won 4, play over the games. You'll see exactly why it is that he went there 6 times, because there's a cool idea lurking in the position that just destroys the other player, and that's why he was able to win. These are not accidents. They're not just happening sporadically over the board. They're the culmination of an immense amount of preparation, which is just obvious. So, yes, first of all, the correspondence game and the neural net engines are having an immense impact on over-the-board chess and pointing the way toward innovations and the rest. When a correspondence player, just as an example, there is a free database of correspondence games at iccf.com. It's fully free. It's the games archive. You do have to join. Joining is free. And then 24 hours later, you get access to the game archive. Correspondence players and the best grandmasters in the world swear that this is the finest database available out there anytime for any purpose. And they have somebody on their team downloading the games at the beginning of every month, the games from the month before. I do too. And if there are wins in there, they usually reflect, they often reflect, perhaps somebody got sick, somebody hung a piece. No, but there are also on occasion some novelties. And those novelties are extremely interesting and useful. If there are novelties in lines that you love, you should be aware of them. When I pulled off my novelty against Lobanov, this was the Russian Correspondence Chess Champ, this was 3 years ago, with this incredibly cool move, I sent it off to Peter Nielsen, who was Magnus' second, and he thanked me for it. And then about 6 months later, I got back a note from him saying, take a look at this. And it was Vishy Anand, who I personally regard as a hero, as the best prepared person in the history of the planet in any sport at any time. But he had gotten to the exact same position and he'd missed the novelty. It shocked me.
So it could have been played against him.
He could have played it. He actually missed the new idea, which is astounding because there aren't that many opportunities in the modern game for a shocking win. And here he had that chance. So the point is that there is an immense amount of work that has to be done. There are databases that do make it a little bit easier, but this is the nature of the modern game and what's happening. Some people don't like the sound of that because, again, it combined. These are great players. They have tremendous imagination and an intuitive sense, but they're also required to do all this technical work. They have teams to do it, of course, but that work is being done, and they're not entering these tournaments unprepared. They're putting in a monstrous amount of preparation time.
It's fascinating. And you may have just answered this question, but we do have one more listener question. Roy Lopes, all the way from Brazil, actually. He had sent 2 questions, but one of them we've already answered. So the second one is, in your opinion, what are the biggest contributions of correspondence chess to the game currently? And I ask it now because I do feel like it's probably what we were just discussing.
Yeah, I think it's a methodology. It's an approach to the game. I'm going to change the question slightly, but I feel my mind is headed in a certain direction here. And it's going to seem a little immodest, and I apologize for that in advance. But In my great predecessors, Garry Kasparov put forth a hypothesis that every world champion brought something new to the game. If that's also true for correspondence chess, and in this case it's not just me, but the contribution of the best players is finding kind of an effective interface between human reasoning and all that high performance computing. We have to get rid of our suboptimal choices, for example, which we don't like to do as humans. We have to make sure that we don't play that favorite opening from our youth. And for me, it's the Kann Sicilian, because if I do that, I'm risking a loss. With white today, the key, and I think this is finding its way over the board game at the highest levels, the key is finding variations that lead to fixed pawn structures with the possibility of that long-term maneuvering I talked about. Even if the engine evaluations are 0.00, you can maneuver here for 20 and 30 moves. And that's what happened, for example, in the Ostpop game. I was 0.00 early, and it wound up being 0.3, with a possibility of some very interesting maneuvering and with a far happier result than I wound up getting. We're fighting against our opponents with their human weaknesses. We're fighting against computers which are not always as prescient as we think they're likely to be. We're fighting against ourselves. We're fighting against our own machines, which don't always provide the clarity that we expect from them.
Very poetic.
On there.
No, I like it. And that makes me think of what you mentioned earlier, that you had like 24 or 25 things that you run through before you make a move. Do you have do you actually have a checklist, or do you just is it like a mental checklist?
It's a mental checklist.
Okay.
But it's permanently etched in there, and it's all boring. You'd say, what are the top 10 things or something like that? Actually, I put together a top 10 list for the American Chess Magazine, which is coming out really soon. And I think it's probably worthwhile to note what the top 2 are, but they don't answer your question. I apologize. My mind is just twisting in the wind here. The key, in fact, is to make sure you have an in-home generator, so if the power goes out, as it often does in our neighborhood, the machines will still run. And the other is to have an understanding life. But in terms of the things that I actually do, they're all geared toward things that I've done. I've made mistakes in the past. And I don't ever. It's bad enough to make one mistake. It's quite another to make it again. That would be ridiculous.
Let's ask about a few more openings, Jon, and then we got a couple more topics. If you're okay with it. So like the French and the Caro, do you ever see those?
And never will again.
Wow, poor French and Caro.
Well, I saw French in the candidates, and I got a win.
Yeah,
it's a nice game.
And what are the most testing lines? Is it the advance against the Caro?
Yes, it's the advanced against the Caro, and then the French. The Black's almost certainly going to play the Morozevich line with an early a6, b5. And there are a lot of ideas there for White. And it is fraught with danger. That whole structure is hanging by a thread. So
this is 3 knight c3, or what is White like against the French?
Yes, knight c3, knight f6, etc. And, over the board, I've always played bishop to g5 there with the idea that if he plays the classical with bishop e7, e5, and I'm trading off my bad dark squared bishop for his good one. Oh boy, it's like magic. This is cool. It turns out that in the correspondence game, I just want to hold on to all of my pieces. So I play e5 as opposed to bishop g5, keep all the pieces on the board, and head into the Morozevich line. And
against
plenty of lines there. Sorry.
Just wanted to pick your brain on a couple more openings. So against d4, you mentioned the Semi-slav earlier, and the Nimzo. So no one plays into the Nimzo. What about stuff like the Queen's Gambit accepted, the Queen's Gambit declined?
There's Semi-slav is the approach there that's normally made. The Queen's Gambit with the bad bishop is very French-like.
Oh, makes sense. Okay. All right. Well, last topic, I think, Jon, doing a major pivot is your chess book collection. It took you a while to come up with a number, but when I last saw you, you felt it was safe to say you have over 5,000 books. You also have what you believe to be, and I don't doubt you, the largest chess stamp collection in the world. So I'm curious how you got into that, and when was there a moment with chess books where you went from like, I have a bunch of these to I'm collecting these?
Well, I started in a fun way. I got very sick when I was in fourth grade, 10 years old, something like that. I got mono. And my dad said, well, you're going to be in bed for a while, so what would you like to pass the time? And I said, could you get me a chess book? So he brought me home a chess book, and then a week later he came back. I distinctly remember, it was Reuben Fine's Great Moments in Modern Chess. It's a big fat book full of games. Good for my dad. He picked well. And he came back in a week later and said, how are you doing with that chess book? And I said, well, actually, I finished it. He said, really? And I started telling him about all the games. And after that, he started bringing me a book every week.
It sounds like your dad was a chess player.
He was a bridge player, actually. But
oh, wow.
He appreciated the fact that games were being played and it's useful, and that I was reading books. And I think that's, yeah. So that's how it all started. I would tell your readers, your listeners, that the key is not how many books you have, it's how many you read.
Yes, amen.
You can have a huge collection, and if you don't read them, there's no point in having them. And it doesn't even matter. You could say, well, what's your favorite book and all the rest? It doesn't really matter if my favorite book may not be your favorite book, but the point is to read them from time to time. Now, the real key for me personally is that I don't have an awful lot of opening books, which may come as a surprise. Because if there's an opening that occurs over the board, I'll make my own with Chessbase and the rest, and I can do so very quickly. The opening books are dated the moment they're printed. If I'm going to buy an opening book, and this happened, there was a book by Petrosian on the Sveshnikov, which was near and dear to my heart, and I was playing it and all the rest. I didn't buy it to see what his recommendations were, and he's an incredibly strong player, Greek champion, and a very good writer. I bought it to see if there were any mistakes in the book. It was one, just one, and I got to use that against an opponent who took the book as sort of his Bible and just played right into the mistake. So this can happen. It's a lot of time and a lot of effort to do this, but that's the reason for.
But what's the advantage? What's the advantage, since you're playing correspondence? What's the advantage of knowing in advance that they might make this mistake, as opposed to just you're going to encounter it? If they make it, and you'll have your engine. Is it because it gives you more time?
Yeah, I was just fully aware that the mistake was lurking out there in the main line in this recommendation, and I just pursued my variations accordingly, hoping, you're not going to win a game if they don't make a mistake. And here was an obvious place where the mistake might occur. And it did.
Okay.
And it did. So it's just another way of, I just concluded, this is a worthy try against this particular opponent. The fun part about this guy, I won't mention his name because I don't want to embarrass anybody here, but I had played against him once before, and he played a Sicilian dragon, which is also on the do not play list.
Yeah, no surprise there.
And I beat him, and he gave up the dragon, and now he played a Sveshnikov, and he lost. And I got paired against him just a year or two ago in the Spanish Masters, and I thought, oh gosh, now what's he going to play? But he was not in the Spanish Masters. Where did I meet him? Met him somewhere else, actually in the Kirstein Memorial. And he also played a Sveshnikov again. It is sound. I don't want to create the impression that it's not. It's fully fine. As far as the stamps are concerned, I've been a stamp collector going back to my earliest days. And the collection is now just breathtaking. I'm president of COSU, which is the Chess on Stamp study unit, and editor of the Chess Stamp Review. I have been for more than 12 years now. And the collection, we have about 100 members who have very fine collections, winning medals at various exhibitions and the rest. And I've even written a lot of chess stamp books as well. So,
and of course, Karpov, the most famous chess grandmaster stamp collector, has that interest ever led you to cross paths with him?
It did. We actually, at the World Championship match between Karpov and Kasparov, I had a cover that was signed by both of them, and I was trying to get them both to sign it. And after one of the matches, Karpov had missed a win, and he was upset, and his hand was sort of shaking, but I went up with the cover. I thought, he'll surely sign this. And he reached out, grabbed the pen, and the pen didn't work. And it was one of those frustrating moments of my collecting life. About a weekend later, I was at the Madison Square Garden for a big stamp club show, and I mentioned this story to one of the dealers. He said, All right, it's your lucky day. He had just sent the limo, and Karpov arrived, and we got to talk for an hour about stamps and stuff, and it was great. And he did sign the cover, which I happened to have with him.
Wow, amazing. So, what did he say about, like, what were the highlights of the hour-long conversation?
I remember lots of bits and pieces of it. He obviously had a lot of money. I would say a lot of money for a Russian, and had built up enormously cool collections, not just for his chess collection, but Belgium and other things. And it was fun to observe. He wasn't there to talk to me, although he did. He was there to buy things from this dealer, and he was primarily interested in some of the more expensive proofs and imperf items that are rare and very hard to find. And he had more money at the time than I did, so his collection then was certainly better than mine. But I think that's turned around in recent years. I'm pretty sure it has.
The Apple stock, it's a powerhouse.
Apple and Nvidia didn't. Yeah, this conversation's gonna head back to stocks in no time. But yeah, it doesn't hurt to have a little bit of money in your pocket. What's the old saying? I've been rich and I've been poor, and rich is better. So
right, yeah, not the most important thing, but it doesn't hurt.
It doesn't hurt.
Cool. Well, I know you said it's not super important which books one reads as long as one actually reads them, but I'm sure you do have some favorites. So could you, as someone who's read so many chess books, name a few of your favorites, Jon?
Yeah, well, I urge everybody to explore different styles and the rest. So we start with tactics, and it's Vukovic. For positional play and for structural play, it's Petrosian. I would add there is not one single book about Petrosian that should be recommended, because there isn't a good one. There are a lot of them, but none of them convey what I really believe about this guy and how important he is to the game. But that doesn't mean I still have every single book by him, about him, and those have been extremely influential. I've searched throughout all this literature for a pattern of play that's useful. For me, in my correspondence play and over the board, the two are very different skills. But Petrosian really is stinking important, and if you haven't played through his games, I mentioned the open game. The end of that game, there's a white knight on G5, and once it gets there, the rest of the game after the knight gets to G5 is just a treat. It's just an utter treat. And if you've never seen it, then I won't say stop listening to this podcast. Wait to the end of this podcast, and then immediately go off and find the game and play through it.
Yeah, I don't know it offhand. I'll say I feel like I've probably seen it, but I don't know it offhand. Is it amongst Petrosian's games? Is it a very well known one?
No, and in fact, if in all the collections of Petrosian games, the open game doesn't appear.
Oh, so maybe I haven't. It
doesn't show up. I'm not sure, but I think it was my Uncle Joe probably showed it to me. So I was classically taught by my Uncle Joe. I should insert that. He was taught by Manuel Lasker. Wow. And this was Joseph Platz, who was a very strong player out of the Bronx Chess Club. And the line on Dr. Platz, he was a medical doctor, was that he won every single tournament that he finished. But dutifully, if someone called and was delivering a baby, he would immediately stop and resign his game and go off and deliver the baby. So he had this funky reputation. He would have had an international reputation if he'd been something other than a doctor.
Wow. Can't fault him there. So is this game, I just looked it up, Jon, 1954 Belgrade, is that it?
Sounds like, yes.
Okay. Yeah, it's not... doesn't even have a title on its chessgames.com page, has about 7 comments. So yeah, I'll be doing a deep dive, and maybe we can do some bonus content with that sometime too.
Yeah, I just happened to, it made an enormous impression upon me, and not because it's spectacular. It doesn't have some amazing combination. That's what you'd expect from a game that I'm pushing like this. But it completely changed my approach to chess. I can't.
And if you were to try to put into words what it changed, what?
I grew up as a kid. I was full of energy, and I wanted to throw people off the board like Tal.
Right.
Everybody did. Of course, you and I both understand that's not a terribly reliable way of approaching it.
Right.
It's fun.
Yeah.
and you'll occasionally get a great game in print. Either way, you may lose spectacularly too. I was looking around for something that was more reliable, and Petrosian was the key.
Okay.
It gives me an opportunity to win, not just some of the time, but all the time. And that's a kind of funny statement from somebody who just got through the world final without winning a game. But I've won my share, and I won my share along the way. So, yeah.
Well, Jon, this has been fantastic. Really appreciate you sharing your wisdom and your stories. It's been a lot of fun to hear. And before we say our goodbyes, is there anything else you would want to add?
No, I just expected one more stock question, but no, it's
stockfish.
stock.
Oh,
no,
stock question. Oh, sure, yeah. So,
but thank you very much.
Whenever I listen to a finance podcast, they say topics discussed are not investment advice or something like that. So,
absolutely,
we'll have to throw that in. But
past decisions are no indication.
Right. But do you have any other companies that you're particularly excited about right now?
I'll give everybody a stock tip here, so long as nobody comes back and decides to kneecap me when it goes down 30%. So in the supply chain era, where everything's it's hard figuring out where packages are and the rest. The key stock, I think, is Impinj. Stock name the ticker name is PI. P as in Peter, I as in Indigo. And they make these little radio frequency chips that stick on packages and the rest. And if you take a look at its recent stock chart, you'll go, oh my goodness gracious. Okay. It also has a market cap of under $3 billion, so it's going to the moon.
Okay, there you have it. As you said, we won't,
I'm not responsible for your losses.
So. Yeah, and invest responsibly. Yes. We would say, what percentage of? I mean, it sounds like back when you were a grad student, you didn't. You probably put a decent chunk of your net worth into it, but. Generally, one is advised to not put more than, say, 3% of the money they have into an individual stock. But we appreciate your insights on stocks as well as everything else, Jon. And I know that as far as I know, you're not super active on social media. If anyone wants to reach you, or keep up with you, is there a way to do that?
They can email me. I'm perfectly happy to have that happen if I can give out my email address.
Sure. Yeah, I already have it, so I'll put it in the notes.
Chess@gmail.com. And anybody who wants a free copy of the Chess Stamp Review is welcome to it.
Okay. So I'll link to that as well. Well, Jon, it's been a lot of fun. I mean, obviously we've chatted a few times off the record, but it's good to get you on the record as well.
A pleasure, Ben. I really appreciate this.
Thanks to everyone who helps make Perpetual Chess possible. Big shout out to my producer, Matthew Passy. I'd also like to thank the Blue Wire Podcast Network, with whom we are proud to be affiliated. Be sure to follow us on social media, Beneficial1 on Twitter, @Perpetual Chess on Instagram, or you can join the Perpetual Chess Facebook group. You can email me, ben@perpetualchesspod.com. And of course, last but not least, I'd like to give major thanks to the Perpetual Chess Patreon and PayPal supporters. Those who choose to join that community based on their level of support can do things like submit questions for guests of the show, have access to live Zoom Q&A lectures with grandmasters who often have appeared on the show, going over chess games, answering questions, stuff like that. And you can even get access to ad-free Perpetual Chess if that's your preference. So, but most of all, thanks to everyone for listening, and we will catch you all on the